Seconds felt like hours as the night unfolded on a dimly lit street. A black man, walking home after a long shift, was suddenly slammed to the ground by uniformed officers, his hands pinned, heart racing. Confusion and fear gripped him. He had done nothing wrong. The crowd watched, whispers of outrage stirring. But then in the chaos, a small glint caught the officer's eyes. A badge. Not just any badge. The insignia of a police chief. The very same officers who had pushed him down froze, their expressions shifting from authority to disbelief. What happens next would leave everyone questioning the line between power and prejudice. It had been a long day for Marcus Thompson. As the youngest police chief in his city's history, he was used to the scrutiny and pressure that came with the badge, but he never imagined that the uniform he wore would one day become a target. That evening, Marcus had finished an exhaustive round of community meetings addressing complaints, mediating disputes, and ensuring his officers were held accountable. Exhausted but satisfied, he decided to take a shortcut home through a quieter part of town, a neighborhood he had walked countless times before without incident. The streets were dimly lit, the air heavy with the remnants of a recent rain. Shadows clung to the corners, and distant sirens painted a familiar, uneasy rhythm. Marcus's mind wandered to the upcoming briefing and the reforms he was determined to implement. He barely noticed the group of officers ahead, their posture rigid, eyes scanning the street with suspicion. As he approached, Marcus felt the subtle tension shift. Their gazes landed on him, not with recognition, but with an assumption that made his stomach tighten. In that instant, he became just another black man walking home. The very authority he embodied, the years of service and sacrifices, seemed invisible in their eyes. Marcus raised his hands instinctively when one officer suddenly shouted a command he hadn't heard before. Before he could react, he was slammed to the ground, pain shooting through his shoulder and back. Time slowed. The world became a blur of boots, harsh voices, and stifled gasps from onlookers. He tried to call out his rank, but the words caught in his throat, drowned by the chaos. Then, in the haze of fear and disbelief, a small shining emblem on his chest, his police chief badge, caught their attention. The moment hung suspended, a fragile bridge between misunderstanding and revelation. Every second felt like it could tip the scales between humiliation and justice. The street fell into a tense silence. For a moment, Marcus lay there, trying to catch his breath, every muscle screaming, as the officers hovered over him. Their eyes darted between each other and the glinting badge pinned to his chest. Recognition flickered, but pride and the weight of their own assumptions seemed to hold them back. The crowd around them began to murmur, some stepping closer, others instinctively holding their phones, capturing every second. Marcus struggled to push himself up, his hands shaking, voice hoarse from shouting, but authority alone was powerless against the raw force of mistaken prejudice. In those harrowing minutes, he felt the sting of years of systemic injustice, moments where a uniform or a title meant nothing against the color of his skin. Every shove, every harsh word, replayed in his mind as if the world had frozen, mocking him for daring to hold power while being black. One officer grabbed his arm, intending to cuff him, while another barked commands that made no sense. The crowd's whispers grew louder, tension thickening like fog. Some onlookers looked away, unwilling to confront the scene. Others shouted for the officers to stop. Marcus could feel the weight of their judgment as acutely as the pain in his body. Then, a subtle change occurred. The badge caught the neon light of a street lamp, reflecting it like a signal. One officer's eyes widened, disbelief slowly replacing aggression. Recognition dawned, yet hesitation lingered. Marcus saw it, the shift between seeing him as just another black man and acknowledging the authority and responsibility he carried. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Even as relief began to ripple through him, Marcus could not ignore the bitter truth. He had nearly become a victim of the very system he had sworn to serve. The officers stepped back, murmuring among themselves, tension still crackling. Marcus remained on the ground a moment longer, letting the weight of the experience sink in. The incident was a microcosm of the city's broader struggles, a collision of power, perception, and prejudice that left no one unscathed. Finally, he rose to his feet, badge still shining, chest heaving. The crowd around them had grown quiet, eyes fixed on him. Marcus felt the eyes of every observer, every skeptic, every believer weighing on him. The rising tide of emotions, fear, anger, shame, awe, swirled like a storm he had to navigate with careful precision. This confrontation, brief as it seemed, had stretched into a profound lesson. Marcus understood more clearly than ever that authority and justice were fragile constructs when colored by assumptions. And in that street, under the flickering streetlights and the wary gaze of those around him, he realized that the hardest battles often happened in moments of silence, in glances, in the space between recognition and denial. Time seemed to fracture as Marcus stood, chest heaving, the rain-slicked pavement beneath him reflecting the harsh glare of streetlights. The officers, once rigid with authority, now wavered, caught between their duty and the undeniable truth of his rank. The badge glimmered like a beacon, exposing their hesitation and the deep-rooted assumptions that had fueled the confrontation. Marcus met their eyes, steady and unwavering, yet the weight of the moment pressed down like iron. In that heartbeat, the air thickened with tension, neither side willing to make the first move. The crowd held its collective breath, sensing the fragile line between escalation and resolution. Marcus felt the sting of humiliation, the adrenaline of injustice, and the quiet fury of someone who had been almost erased by bias. One officer stepped forward, hand raised, as if to apologize, yet words faltered on his tongue. Another muttered under his breath, unsure whether to enforce protocol or acknowledge the glaring reality. Marcus's mind raced not with fear, but with the resolve of every black man who had faced prejudice while carrying responsibility and authority. The moment crystallized into something larger than himself, a confrontation not just with the officers, but with the systemic assumptions that had put him on the ground in the first place. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant wail of sirens and the soft shuffle of the onlookers. Marcus's pulse thundered in his ears, yet he remained composed, a pillar amidst chaos. Finally, the senior officer's gaze flicked to the badge, then to Marcus's unwavering eyes. Recognition, respect, and something bordering on shame crossed his face. He stepped back fully, signaling the end of the confrontation, yet the lesson lingered like smoke in the air. Marcus exhaled slowly, the tension dissolving but leaving an indelible mark. He realized that authority was not merely a symbol, it was a responsibility, fragile and often tested by those unwilling to see beyond assumptions. That night, under flickering lights and the watchful eyes of a silent crowd, justice had not arrived as an act of heroism. It had arrived as the quiet acknowledgement of truth. Every heartbeat, every glance, every suppressed word had converged to a single moment of reckoning. And in that moment, Marcus understood that the fight against prejudice was ongoing, not only in the streets but in every mind willing to question their assumptions. The street had quieted, leaving only the echo of distant sirens and the soft murmur of onlookers. Marcus stood tall, his uniform soaked from the rain, badge gleaming like a reminder of both authority and vulnerability. The officers who had pinned him moments ago now avoided his gaze, caught between acknowledgement and lingering discomfort. In that silence, Marcus felt a complex mix of relief, frustration, and determination, an understanding that change often arrives slowly, and sometimes through moments of personal confrontation. As he walked home, his thoughts swirled around the incident. This encounter, brief as it seemed, was a microcosm of a larger struggle, one that he had lived throughout his career. It wasn't merely about a badge, a uniform, or a moment of recognition. It was about challenging assumptions, breaking cycles of prejudice, and asserting humanity in a system that too often overlooked it. Marcus knew that his position afforded him influence, but it could not shield him from the bias that lingered in the hearts and minds of others. He reflected on the crowd, the silent witnesses, and the ones who had captured the moment on their phones. Their presence was a reminder that societal change depended not just on individuals like him, but on communities willing to confront injustice, to see beyond appearances, and to act with awareness. Every step he took home reinforced a simple truth. Awareness and courage often arrived in fragments, in seconds of recognition, in the quiet realization of those willing to acknowledge reality. By the time Marcus reached his doorstep, the rain had eased, leaving the streets glistening under the faint glow of the streetlights. He paused, taking a deep breath, and realized that the incident had left him stronger, more resolute. The confrontation was over, but its lessons would ripple through his life, shaping how he led, how he advocated, and how he fought for justice. And yet the final thought lingered, haunting and powerful. How many moments like this went unseen? How many lives were defined not by courage or service, but by assumptions, prejudice, and fleeting misunderstandings? Marcus knew the fight against injustice was far from over, and in that understanding lay both the burden and the power to change the world. One recognition, one confrontation, one moment at a time.